London, Paris, Rome, Washington, D.C. 4 of the world's most iconic capitals, yet none has a skyline like New York, Shanghai, or Dubai. This isn't some strange coincidence. It's by design. Right now, developers across the globe are sitting on billions of dollars worth of skyscraper plans that will never see the light of day. Imagine an alternate reality where the Eiffel Tower is dwarfed by 100-story glass towers, or where the US Capitol building sits in the shadow of corporate headquarters. Many cities have drawn invisible lines in the sky that no builder can cross, even with unlimited money. Today, we're digging into the hidden forces that keep skyscrapers out of city centers, the multi-billion-dollar battles being fought over these restrictions, and what this means for the future of our cities. Look at a map of Washington, D.C., and you'll notice something strange. The tallest building in the nation's capital is the Washington Monument at 555 feet, but the tallest habitable building, the old post office tower, at just 315 feet. For comparison, that's shorter than a 30-story apartment building in most major cities. This isn't because DC lacks ambition or money. It's because of a law passed in 1910 limiting building heights to the width of the adjacent street plus 20 feet. No building in DC can be taller than 130 feet, with a few exceptions reaching 160 feet. A century-old law has effectively banned skyscrapers from America's capital. The reason? Thomas Jefferson wanted DC to be a low and convenient city, unlike the crowded European capitals of his day. Later, when the Cairo Hotel was built at 164 feet in 1894, public outrage over this monster led Congress to create the height limit. But DC isn't alone. Paris has similar restrictions. Until recently, buildings over 37 meters, 121 feet, were prohibited in central Paris. The 59-story Tour Montparnasse, built in 1973, was so hated by Parisians that it led to new height restrictions just 2 years after completion. For 40 years afterward, no buildings over 37 meters were allowed in the central city. London takes a different approach. Instead of a blanket height limit, they have protected view corridors, 13 specific views of St. Paul's Cathedral and other landmarks that cannot be blocked. These corridors create an invisible network across the city where tall buildings simply cannot exist. This is why London's skyscrapers cluster in specific areas like Canary Wharf and the eastern cluster of the financial district. These battles over building height aren't just about aesthetics. They're about money, power, and competing visions for what a city should be. When cities ban skyscrapers from their centers, they're making a trillion-dollar economic decision. In Manhattan, land values can exceed $10,000 per square foot. At those prices, building up isn't just desirable, it's necessary to make projects financially viable. Take London's Shard, which stands at 1,016 feet. If London's protected view corridors had prevented its construction, the economic impact would be massive. The building cost $2.3 billion to construct. It houses offices for 31 companies employing roughly 8,000 people. It generates approximately $385 million in economic activity annually. The viewing platform alone attracts 900,000 visitors each year. When cities restrict height, they're not just regulating aesthetics, they're redistributing wealth. Property owners who could build higher lose potential value, while owners of existing tall buildings see their assets become more valuable due to artificial scarcity. In DC, economists estimate the height limit adds at least 5% to office rents. Across the entire market, that's hundreds of millions of dollars annually transferred from tenants to landlords. This has created a fascinating paradox in real estate economics. The cities with the strictest height limits often become the most expensive. Paris and central London have some of Europe's most expensive real estate, precisely because supply is artificially constrained. In contrast, cities like Tokyo and Chicago, which allow relatively unrestricted vertical growth, have maintained more reasonable property prices despite massive population growth. Tokyo's 23 special wards have built more housing units yearly than the entire state of California, largely by building upward. But economics isn't the only factor at play. One of the most contentious issues with skyscrapers isn't what you can see, it's what you can't see, specifically the shadows they cast. In 1987, New York City residents were outraged when a 72-story tower at Columbus Circle cast an 800-foot shadow across Central Park. This led to new zoning rules controlling shadow impacts on public spaces. But New York's shadow regulations are relatively lax compared to other cities. In Boston, the Boston Common and Public Garden have been protected from new shadows since 1990. Any building that would cast a shadow on these parks during certain hours is automatically rejected. San Francisco has the most stringent shadow laws in America. Proposition K, passed in the 1980s, requires the city to reject any building that would cast shadows on public parks or open spaces. This single law has prevented dozens of skyscrapers from being built in the city center. The battle over shadows has created a new kind of urban science. Developers now spend millions on shadow studies, creating detailed 3D models showing how shadows will move throughout the year. Some have even redesigned buildings with unusual shapes specifically to minimize shadow impacts. The Transamerica Pyramid in San Francisco, with its distinctive tapered design, was partially created to minimize shadows. The building casts a narrower shadow than a traditional rectangular skyscraper would at the same height. But shadows aren't just about sunlight, they're about class and power. In New York, a new generation of super slender luxury towers on Billionaire's Row cast shadows over Central Park. Critics argue that the views and sunlight enjoyed by millions of park visitors are being sacrificed for the benefit of a few ultra-wealthy condo owners. In Prague, UNESCO threatened to revoke the city's World Heritage status if skyscrapers were built near the historic center. The entire historic district has a strict height limit to preserve the medieval skyline. Vienna faced a similar ultimatum in 2017 when a high-rise development was planned. The city had to choose between UNESCO status and development, ultimately modifying the plans to preserve their heritage listing. In St. Petersburg, Russia, after several modern skyscrapers were proposed near historic areas, UNESCO and citizen protests led to a complete ban on skyscrapers in the central district. This conflict between preservation and development isn't limited to Europe. Kyoto, Japan has strict height limits to preserve views of surrounding mountains and historic temples. The tallest building is just 131 feet, a height that would be considered mid-rise in most major cities. The economics of historic preservation are complex. While height limits reduce potential development value, they can increase tourism revenue. Prague receives over 8 million tourists annually, drawn largely by its preserved historic character. Some cities have found creative compromises. Barcelona allows some high-rise development, but keeps it far from the historic Gothic quarter. Singapore concentrates its skyscrapers in the Marina Bay area, preserving historic neighborhoods like Chinatown and Little India. But these battles reflect fundamental questions about cities. Are they living organisms that must grow and change, or are they cultural treasures that should be preserved? Who gets to decide? Skyscraper restrictions create an environmental paradox. Dense, vertical cities typically have lower carbon footprints per resident than sprawling ones. When people can't build up, they build out. Washington, D.C.'s height limit has pushed development into Virginia and Maryland, creating longer commutes and more carbon emissions. Studies estimate that if D.C. could build to New York heights in its downtown, it could accommodate 30% more residents within walking distance of metro stations. But skyscrapers come with their own environmental challenges. Glass towers often consume more energy per square foot than traditional buildings. The Salesforce Tower in San Francisco uses as much electricity as 12,000 homes. Wind effects are another concern. Chicago, the windy city, became even windier due to skyscrapers creating wind tunnels at street level. Cities like London now require detailed wind studies before approving tall buildings. Some cities are finding middle paths. Copenhagen allows taller buildings but requires environmental performance standards that exceed national regulations. Paris has gradually relaxed height limits in specific areas while requiring new towers to meet strict sustainability standards. The most innovative approach might be in Singapore, where buildings over a certain height must include sky gardens, green spaces built into the towers themselves. These reduce the urban heat island effect and provide habitat for birds and insects even hundreds of feet above ground. The battle over skyscraper bans is evolving. Paris has relaxed some height restrictions, allowing buildings up to 180 meters, 590 feet, in specific areas, though still nothing close to supertall status. London continues to allow skyscrapers, but only in designated clusters away from protected views. Technology is changing the equation too. New mass timber construction techniques allow wooden buildings to reach heights previously impossible, up to 18 stories today, with 30-story wooden buildings on the horizon. These buildings have significantly lower carbon footprints than concrete and steel towers. Some cities are exploring horizontal skyscrapers, like the Crystal in Chongqing, China, a 300-meter horizontal structure elevated above ground. This approach provides density without blocking views. Virtual technologies like augmented reality now allow city planners and the public to visualize proposed buildings before approval, experiencing exactly how shadows will fall or views will change. But the fundamental question remains: who gets to decide how high we build? Is it preservationists protecting heritage, economists promoting growth, environmentalists fighting climate change, or residents defending their sunlight? The answer varies widely from city to city, creating a natural experiment in urban development. A century from now, this approach will have created the most livable, sustainable cities. Now, those invisible lines in the sky remain, powerful forces shaping our cities in ways most people never notice. Next time you visit Paris, London, or Washington, D.C., look up and imagine the skyscrapers that aren't there. Empty sky above these cities isn't an accident, the result of centuries of battles over what our cities should be. Here's something to think about. If these height restrictions are completely wrong, Tokyo, with its minimal height limits, kept housing affordable despite massive population growth. Paris and London, with strict limits, face housing crises. Could it be that the cities we consider most beautiful are actually causing the most harm? Let us know what you think in the comments section. Enjoyed this video? Make sure to subscribe and watch our next one shown on screen.